accessing the webinar. We'll be sure that everyone, this will be posted later on, so you can access it later. My name is John Mackey, and I'm the Executive Director of the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority. I want to thank you all for joining us today to learn about our new reimbursement policy. ICJ's General Counsel, Angela Weiss, and the Head of Grants, Kevin Gibbons, will primarily lead this discussion and also answer the questions that you have sent us. As I noted on our website, after this is over, you'll find a link to this webinar, as well as a memo by Ms. Weiss that explains in detail the history and law that has compelled us to make this change. And for a deeper account of our discussion, I'd recommend reviewing it. But before we begin, let me give a brief summary of how we got here. At the end of September, the Department of Justice's Office of Justice Programs added a new certification requirement with its funds. We had no prior notice that OJP was going to mandate this new requirement, and had only learned in mid-August from the Office of Victims of Crime that there were potential issues with our long-standing payment policy. As a result, ICJ had to quickly change its policies and procedures related to grantee payments. Whereas ICJ previously used a system that allowed for advance payment, we must now primarily use a reimbursement system. As this change is mandated by federal requirements, it also applies to state grants through the Illinois Grant Accountability and Transparency Act, or GATA. Without making this change, ICJ would be in violation of federal and state law and no longer have access to its federal funds. At ICJ, we recognize this policy change will result in a delay in payments for some grantees. And as ICJ's Executive Director, I want to be clear that we did all we could to make this a less abrupt transition, but we were unsuccessful. I personally apologize for any difficulty this will cause, and my staff and I pledge to do whatever we can to help you through this transition. If you have questions after the webinar, please contact me at 312-793-8550, again, 312-793-8550, or by email at john.mackey, M-A-K-I, @illinois.gov. And let me now turn things over to Angela Weiss.
Good morning, everyone. So as the letter I drafted stated, effective October 1st, 2017, ICJ has adopted a reimbursement-only payment policy. ICJ will make grants to grantees only based on financial reports documenting actual expenditures. Reports will no longer contain a section to submit anticipated expenditures for the next reporting period. All grantees are going to be required to submit financial reports to ICJ on either a monthly or quarterly basis. Grantees who submit monthly financial reports will receive monthly reimbursements. Grantees who submit quarterly financial reports will receive quarterly reimbursements. This policy applies to both state and federal grantees. So this was the subject of many questions, which we will address a bit later in this presentation. But for your background information, the Federal Uniform Guidance, which is 2 CFR 200, applies directly to all federal grants, and then through the Illinois Grant Accountability and Transparency Act also applies to state grants. That language says in relevant part, quote, advance payments to a non-federal entity must be limited to the minimum amounts needed and be timed to be in accordance with the actual immediate cash requirements of the non-federal entity in carrying out the purposes of the approved program or project. So that language is not new. That's been around since the most recent edition was 2014. What is new is that historically ICJ had interpreted that requirement to apply only to itself as the state administering agency. We have since learned that the federal government interprets that to apply to both ICJ as an agency, but also to our sub-grantees. So it's not sufficient to say, well, ICJ has timed our drawdown to minimize cash on hand and make sure that we get payment out as soon as possible. It also applies to our grantees or all of you. Then on top of that, so the language in the uniform guidance is about minimizing and for immediate cash requirements. The language from the DOJ Financial Guide, which is the DOJ's interpretation of what immediate means, is to say that any cash advances must be for 10 days or less. So absent any other relevant interpretation, ICEJA is going with the 10-day DOJ interpretation. That is what has to inform our understanding of that rule. So that is how that applies to both state and federal grants. There are two exceptions to this reimbursement-only policy that everyone should be aware of. The first is JAG grantees who have established a trust fund for grant funds. So the JAG grant is different in nature here in that the JAG grant specifically allows for drawing down all of the funds at the beginning of the period as long as certain conditions are met. And that is different in kind than any of the other federal grants, and it is also different than any state grants. No state grants allow for programmatic income or depositing the money in an interest-bearing account the way that the JAG grants do. So if you're a JAG grantee, this change does not affect you. The second exception is for grantees who receive advance approval from ICEJA to make a large equipment purchase, and for that purchase, they need the money ahead of time. In that instance, if they get proper approval from ICEJA, ICEJA will advance funds to the grantee and time it such that within 10 days of making that advance, the grantee is completing the purchase and spending the money. So that will be done on a case-by-case basis, analyzing where those large equipment purchases, which grants have budgets that call for that and which grantees with those budgets lack the sufficient cash on hand to otherwise complete the purchase. So those are the two exceptions to the policy. And now I will turn things over to Kevin Givens to talk about procedures for the quarter that just ended September 30th.
All right, so many of you may have submitted a just financial report for the quarter that ended September 30th. We had received a number of questions related to would you have to modify or resubmit that document? The answer is no. ICEJA will edit that report that we have currently in our office and remove any information related to projected expenses. We will only reimburse you for grant award expenses that occurred within the current reporting period only. So there's nothing you have to do on your end as it relates to that. We'll modify the form and then we'll push through whatever reimbursements that are required. Additionally, in the event that you may have received a cash advance that exceeds the expenses to date on the financial report, this is really crucial. What we'll end up doing at that point is that if we identify that you cannot spend whatever cash advance funds that you currently have on hand within a 10-day period, we will reach out to you and discuss next steps. We need to identify exactly who has excess cash. We need to identify a number of things as part of our next steps that we'll be reaching out to you over the next week or so. So in that case, right now, there's really nothing that you can do but continue to be in contact with your grant monitor about the status of any voucher information you may have submitted to us, and we'll just continue that communication at that point. As we move forward, there will be a number of changes for financial reporting. One would be that we will be revising the financial reporting form and remove any language related to cash advances. Most of you are used to seeing the cash advance or projected expenses for the next quarter or next month. Any reference to that will be removed. The revised form will address monthly or quarterly reporting, and that format will allow you to detail your grant award expenditures, your matching fund expenditures, and any remaining balances as it relates to your grant award or your matching funds. The following slide is an overview of what that form could look like. It's still in a draft phase where we're working out a few concerns that we have with it, but in general, the form will look like what this next slide shows. This does mimic the GATA periodic financial report and some of the additional information that's required at the very top of the form related to your state appropriation code, and this is for state grant only. Information related to your FEIN number, program period agreement number, and so on. The middle section of the form is the portion in blue is what you'll be filling out, and there are calculations behind the form that will help detail balances and year-to-date values and so on that we find useful on our end, and also I think you may find also useful. At the bottom of the form, you'll notice that there's a grant certification piece consistent with GATA. This language is different than what you may have on your current form. Additionally, it still requires 2 signatures from your organization, from the person that prepared it, and then someone that's actually at a higher managerial level than the preparer to sign off on it. This form will not change drastically from what you see here, but we'll just add a few additional pieces. Grantees that have program income, there will be in a form that will address that. There will be a form that will address closeout details and so on. So eventually you'll end up receiving a workbook that will be used for all of your financial reporting, similar to what you most likely currently have in hand, but just updated. The next section are questions received from grantees.
So this is Angie again. I'm going to walk through the questions that we received. This should reflect all questions that we received. If you believe that you submitted a question that for some reason is not captured here, please send me an email after this and I will make sure to respond to your question. So the first question we received is, will this webinar be accessible at a later time? Yes. This will be posted to our website by next Monday, October 23rd, so that you're able to refer back to it, or if anyone was unable to participate today, we'll be able to view it. The next question. If a grantee has already submitted a quarterly grant report for the period ended September 30th and included projections for the next quarter, will it be rejected? No. If you've already submitted your financial report, it will not be rejected. Hopefully everyone has submitted their financial report for the quarter ended September 30th. For that quarter, financial reports should be submitted and completed the same way that they've historically been done, and ICEJA will make the necessary changes on our end to make sure that they only reflect actual expenditures and that payments that go out only are based on expenditures and no cash advances. Next slide. If you are a JAG grantee who has established a trust fund account, are you exempt from the reimbursement-only policy? Yes. JAG grantees who have established a trust fund account are an exception to the reimbursement-only policy. Those grantees will still be able to receive advance payments. If you're a JAG grantee and you remain on a quarterly financial reporting period, then you will still be able to receive up to 3 months of funding in advance. If you are a JAG grantee and you eventually end up on a monthly reporting period, then you will be able to receive 1 month funds in advance. So it will depend on what reporting period you go with. The next question was, for those grantees who will be subject to the reimbursement system, will we have the option to request monthly reimbursement from the Associate Director of Grants? So as we laid out in the letter that went out last week, the Associate Director of Grants will be making a determination for every grantee as to whether the appropriate reporting period is monthly or quarterly. Grantees won't exactly be able to request that from the Associate Director, but we do have a procedure in mind that gets feedback from grantees about their needs. So if you're a grantee who has not previously requested a cash advance, meaning you're a grantee who has historically only received reimbursements from ICEJA, which is many of our grantees, then at least for the time being, you will remain on a quarterly reimbursement cycle. So this will be completely status quo for you because you're used to receiving quarterly reimbursement. If you're a grantee who has historically requested a cash advance, on the other hand, you will soon be receiving from your grant monitor what we're calling a justification form. And on that form, you will be able to explain your situation and your need for monthly reimbursement if you want to get on a monthly reporting cycle. So if you are comfortable with quarterly, then for the time being, we'll just stay with quarterly. You don't need to submit this form. If you are someone who wants to switch to monthly reporting, then you will have to submit this form with the reasons for why you need monthly. We do have one set of grantees, our ARI grantees, who are already on a monthly reporting cycle, and they will all remain on a monthly reporting cycle. So those grantees also will not have to fill out this justification form. Next slide. The next question was, what is the anticipated turnaround time for reimbursement? Meaning within how many days from submitting the financial report can a grantee expect payment? Within 30 days of receiving a complete and accurate financial report, ICEJA will complete its review and submit the necessary paperwork to the state comptroller for payment. If a financial report comes in that is not complete or that is not to ICEJA standards, is not sufficient to be submitted because it does not properly reflect expenditures, then it will have to go back to the grantee, and this 30 days will start over when the grantee resubmits the form reflecting any necessary edits. From the time that it goes to the comptroller for payment, the exact timing as to when a grantee will receive funds will vary depending on the source of funds. So that is something that is out of ICEJA's hands and really remains or lies with the comptroller. The next question is, why is ICEJA using the DOJ specific guidance for advance payments rather than the standard federal uniform guidance, which does not contain a 10-day restriction? So as I went over under discussing the policy that we're going through, ICEJA follows both the federal uniform guidance and the DOJ grants financial guide. The DOJ grants financial guide is not contrary to the uniform guidance, but rather it's DOJ's codification and elaboration of the uniform guidance. So it's their interpretation and additions to the uniform guidance. All of the federal grant funds that ICEJA currently administers are DOJ-administered funds, and therefore, for all of our federal grants, DOJ's guidance is particularly important for us to fully understand and comply with. The next question is, what specifically does GATA state in regard to state agency reimbursements or advance payments? So GATA is codified at 30 ILCS 708. If you want to take a look at the complete language, please go ahead, it's publicly available. It does not speak specifically to payment procedures. As with many topics, GATA is rather vague. Instead of detailing every complicated detail to grant management, there are two things. First, it adopts the federal uniform guidance, which we've gone through. And the second is that there's an entire unit of state government called GAT2 that's dedicated to overseeing the implementation of GATA. So ICEJA partakes in regular trainings, webinars, et cetera, that GAT2 puts on, explaining how GATA applies to state grants and what all the various requirements are. One thing that is very clear is that the federal uniform guidance requirement that advance payments be limited to minimum amounts needed for immediate cash requirements is applied to state grants through GATA. The 10-day rule is DOJ's codification of immediate. The next question is, for grants that involve only state funding, why are DOJ rules regarding payments being adapted? So this is a nuanced response, which is that DOJ rules are not directly being applied to state funds. DOJ-specific guidance is not what applies to state funds, rather it's the federal uniform guidance that applies to state funds. However, the DOJ interpretation dictates how ICEJA interprets the immediate requirement more generally, because it is the only federal guidance we've gotten on what the feds mean by immediate. So if there were a different unit of federal government that instead had interpreted immediate to mean 30 days, then ICEJA would have the ability to say for its state funds, well, okay, DOJ says 10 days, but this other unit of state government says 30 days, so we're going to go with the 30-day interpretation. That seems reasonable to us. But that doesn't exist. There is no, federal unit of government that has said immediate means quarterly or immediate means month. And in absent that, it would be unreasonable for ICEJA to say, oh, DOJ thinks immediate is 10 days, but we think immediate means much longer. That just, it would not, it would go against federal requirement. It would not hold up in any sort of court or audit, and so absent some other federal guidance, ICEJA has to go with the 10-day rule. The next question is along the same line, which is, what is the purpose of adopting the DOJ's 10-day rule for grants that do not involve DOJ funds? So please reference the responses that we just went to, and really what it boils down to is that ICEJA has to avoid violating state and federal law, just as all of our grantees want to avoid being in violation of any of those regulations as well. The next question is, we have a fully executed agreement allowing for advance payments. How will this be affected? So all of you on the phone today are grantees who have fully executed agreements. And those agreements contain language that allows for the possibility of advance payments, but it doesn't require advance payments. So given that any advance payment that were to exceed 10 days would violate state and federal law, ICEJA will no longer be utilizing that option under existing grants. And what I'll refer you to is, if you want to dig into this a little bit more, if you look at your grant agreement with ICEJA, in Part 1, the exact section numbers will vary a little bit. I'm going to go based off of the grantee who submitted this question. So if you're the grantee who submitted this question, please pay particular attention here, but otherwise the general section names should be consistent across grants. So in Part 1, Article 2 of your grant agreement, there should be something entitled Compliance with Uniform Grant Rules. And for the grantee who submitted this question, this is Part 2.4 of Article 2. And that says, grantee certifies that it shall adhere to the applicable uniform and administrative requirements, cost principles, and audit requirements, which are published in Title II, Part 200 of the Code of Federal Regulations. So that's the federal uniform guidance that we've been talking about. And then a bit later in that same section, so again, Part 1, Article 2, there's a section called Precedents, and this is 26.12 for the grantee who submitted this question. And there it says that in the event that there is a conflict between this agreement and any of the exhibits or attachments hereto, this agreement shall control. So what that does is says that the provision about complying with 2 CFR 200 takes precedent over anything else that comes later. So yes, your Exhibit C may have referenced advance payment. However, because it has been determined that advance payment, initial cash request, quarterly advance payments would violate federal law, your requirement to comply and our requirement to comply with federal law as stated in the agreement will take precedence over the possibility of an initial cash payments or cash advances. So that's sort of the legal analysis of where your executed grant is at. So it is not anticipated at this time that any amendments will be needed to our existing grants because they already provide for compliance with these federal and state laws in their current form. If you have additional questions about that, you are welcome to reach out to me. The next question we received is there a waiver that grantees can accept instead of the GATA? So to be frank, I'm not exactly sure what this question is getting at. I'm not sure what it means instead of the GATA, but what I can say is that ICEJA is not able to grant a waiver to these laws. So no waivers to any of our grantees will be given to this policy. The next question is, do all federal agencies require the same certification language? The answer to that is no. The certification, I believe this was referencing the new certification requirement that was referenced in the letter that we sent out last week. That certification is specific to the DOJ Office of Justice Program, and so that is DOJ specific. Nonetheless, the content of it, meaning compliance with payment requirements, applies to all of our grants. The next question is VOCA funding administered through DOJ? Yes, VOCA is one of the federal grants that ICEJA administers through the Department of Justice. And then the final question we received was, if there's an amendment to current grant agreements, can a grantee make a certification to allow drawdown advance payments to be made and dispersed in the required specific time period? The answer here is no. As I just said, we don't anticipate needing to amend our current grant agreements, but even if we were to do so, drawdowns are not possible because the state does not have a drawdown system. Therefore, the procedure that we've outlined today for payments, which requires grantees to submit financial reports, ICEJA to review those reports, and then submit documentation to the state comptroller for payment, is the only option available for ICEJA to pay its grantees. This is one where I wish the state had a drawdown system. It would be wonderful if that happens someday, but it's just currently not a feasible possibility. And with that, we will conclude for today. I hope we've addressed everyone's questions. I want to convey our, sincere apologies for any hardship that this causes for our grantees, and we are definitely here to work with you through this. So it's going to be certainly a period of a lot of work, both at ICEJA and for our grantees, but I am confident that we will get through it. So thank you so much for participating today and for working with us. Have a good day.